Today we're going to talk about even more interesting ways to use a pentatonic scale, this time using patterns that are referred to as 3-1-3 patterns. Stay tuned. Okay, so one of the problems with pentatonic scales that a lot of people have, and if you go back to my previous lessons on this, from lesson number 2, where we learned the basic 5 patterns across the whole fretboard, those were all 2-note per string patterns. Now, those are very useful patterns, something we should all know and something we should all get very used to using. But there is an interesting problem that arises when playing those as far as picking goes. Now, if you talk to a whole bunch of different players, you're going to get a lot of different answers as to what people think is correct way of going about picking. I've always been a bit of an economy picker, or I shouldn't say a bit of an economy picker. I've always been an economy picker, meaning that if I'm on one string, I'm going to continually do downstrokes and upstrokes for the most part if I'm playing lead lines. And as soon as I'm going to switch strings, I'm going to pick in the direction I'm switching strings. Now that kind of goes against other players who may do strict alternate picking, meaning they're going to maybe pick down, up, down, and then they'll switch strings with an upstroke. You know, I'm not going to say one way is better than the other. I've always learned that I'm going to pick in the direction that I'm switching strings in. So if I'm doing a 3-note per string pattern like this, I'm going to go down, up, down, down, and then come back up because I'm switching strings in the upward motion. So when you do play a lot of economy picking, what you'll find is 2-note per string patterns don't facilitate a lot of speed because you're picking a downstroke, then an upstroke, and you're kind of moving in this upwards direction away from the next note you want to play. Unfortunately, pentatonic scales are usually arranged in 2-note patterns. Okay, so if we were playing 3-note per string patterns, it makes it a lot easier because I could take, let's say, an A major scale. I could go down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, and get very fluid motion across the strings that way. Right? Because of the fact that my pick is always kind of in the right place to change strings. That's not really what I wanted to talk about, but it does bring up an interesting way of maybe regrouping pentatonic scales into even yet newer, possibly more interesting, but yet different ways of playing the pentatonic scales than we've maybe seen in the past. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's go back to our root pattern that we discussed in, I believe it was lesson 2. What if we start expanding this out, taking the concept of the horizontal playing we talked about in lesson number 3, and we stretch our fingers out and try to incorporate 2 of our patterns, so it wouldn't just be our root pattern now, it would also be our next pattern as well. And incorporate those together. What you're going to find is you have patterns that are now going to use all 4 fingers in 3 separate, let's call them fingerings or shapes. We're going to have one pattern that creates a 1-3-4, but widely stretched out, a 1-2-4 that's widely stretched out, and another 1-2-4 that's going to be a little closer together. Here's what I mean by that. If I go to my root pattern, I play the first 3 notes. This note here could also be located up here. That's a concept we talked about in lesson 1, which was mapping our fingerboard. What if I said I'm not going to play this note here anymore? I'm going to move it up to here so that my pattern now looks like this. You'll notice that I have a long stretch here going with a 1-3-4 pattern as far as the fingers go. Well, if we continue that down through the whole scale, we can start here and combine those 2 patterns as well, giving us a stretched out 1-2-4 pattern. So here would be okay. Then if we continue that down, the next pattern would be 1-2-4, same as this one. Okay. Next one would be 1, 2, 4, but you see how it's going to be a lot closer together. This is now giving me a much faster way to pick through these. Okay, so the problem is we can go all the way up the scale like that. The problem is we're always repeating a note. Okay, so we'll come back to a solution for that in a second. But what we see is we have 3 patterns now. We have a stretched out 1, 3, 4, a stretched out 1, 2, 4, and a kind of closer 1, 2, 4. If we move through any combination or pairs of the patterns we talked about in our main pentatonic lesson 2, we can get the same sort of idea. And it's always going to be the same shapes. So 1, 2, 4, stretched out 1, 3, 4, stretched out 1, 2, 4. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to have a lot of these patterns that are going to be moved all over the fretboard. So if we can get used to a stretch, it's going to open up a lot of possibilities. Now, a lot of people say, well, I can't stretch that far. Okay, well, we could simply move that up the fretboard even and do the same pattern up here. Until we get used to it, and then, move it back from there, right? Whichever pattern we want to do. Okay? So that is something you can kind of work through slowly. But now let's go back to that original problem I said, where if we're playing our pattern, we're always doubling up a note here. I don't really necessarily want to hear that. It might be interesting. If we're playing something quick and legato, maybe it might have an interesting sound. But what if we just eliminate this note and eliminate this note on the middle string if we were to say, look at it like a 3-string pattern? So something like this. Because we've already played this note here, we don't need to play it here. And because we're going to play this note here, we don't need to play it here. So what we end up with is odd number of groupings on the strings, which allows me to keep my down-up motion going the way I want it to. Down, up, down, 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 up, down, up, down. Okay? Gives us a very fast way of playing through a pentatonic scale and grouping the notes together in a new way. I basically played this. But I'm now able to play it much faster because of the grouping of the notes. And it also gives it a different flow to it and a different sound, I think. So what if we took this concept and moved it over our entire fretboard utilizing all of our patterns? I'm going to run through, and you're going to see the diagrams on the screen as I do this, all of the different patterns that we could have in combining the scales in these so-called 3-note per string, 1-note per string, 3-note per string patterns. Okay? So starting back here with our first pattern, here was our root pattern. We're going to combine that with the pattern that preceded it. We would have this. We could then start another pattern just on the second string of those patterns. So that would be this. We could then continue down the scale and start on the fourth string. And finally go down and start on the third string. We've now completed the combination of our first and second pentatonic patterns in this so-called 3-1-3 combination and grouping them into 3-string shapes. And if we learn all those, gives us a very interesting way to be able to go through all of these patterns and come up with so many new ideas and lines possibly with a very different sound that don't sound pentatonic anymore. Let's go through the next combination now, where we would combine our root pattern and the following pattern after that. So we kind of looked at some of these already. Starting on the next string. Starting on the next string. Starting on the next string. Okay, so we see there's a lot of possibilities here. Let's move up and combine the next two patterns. So we're going to have this. Starting on the next string. Next string. Next string. Okay. We can combine the next one now, starting here. All right, so that's those two patterns. And then finally, we can combine the final pattern with basically the octave up version of this pattern. Now, you might say, well, what about this part of the fretboard? Well, that's just going to be the same combinations as the one we've already covered back here, but probably in an easier fashion because the fingers are going to be so much closer together. So that would be like this. The final combination would be right up here, starting at the 17th fret, where it might actually get a little bit tight. All right, so we see now how we've covered so much ground with these, and if we can practice these and get them to the point where they're very, very comfortable, it's going to open up so many doors for us as far as what we can do with our pentatonic scales. The other thing we can do is, instead of looking at them just as 3-string groupings, we can actually play, if we go back, let's say, to our root pattern, the one following it, we could play through and combine 2 of the patterns at the same time, something like this. So basically work up almost an extra octave. We could also then start it from here on the 5th string as well and combine the next sets of patterns. Okay, once we get used to this, it gives us a lot of really interesting options for our playing. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm trying to compile a lot of the study materials that I've shown in the little graphics through the video and make them available through downloads through my website. I'm working on that, and I'll provide links in the description when I get that done. Then you can maybe download those and practice along with some of the ideas I'm doing here, rather than just having to follow the on-screen ones, depending on the computer or maybe tablet you're looking at. Maybe some of them aren't too clear, so I've had a couple people ask for that. So keep an eye out for that when I get a chance to put those up. So I'm going to leave it there for this time, and we're going to take this concept even a step further next time. So I think it's going to be really important to kind of mess around with these shapes all over the fretboard, getting used to sort of visualizing our pentatonic scales in this fashion, which can be a really useful thing. And I find that it's really neat when we can start to use these lead ideas in combination with some more of the typical pentatonic playing. the more traditional ideas mixed in with these can really open up a lot of doors. But first and foremost, we really just have to work slowly through these, getting used to the stretches, right? And another thing to talk about with the stretches, even if you can't get this stretch, it still gives us a way we could play through these patterns with altered fingerings, maybe, just to get us thinking in different ways, getting to the pentatonic scale. One idea would be something like this. It's obviously not going to be built for the speed, but it gets us moving through our pentatonic patterns in a different way. So next time we're going to expand upon this and start thinking even more concepts, thinking of even more concepts with this new idea we came up with, which is the 3-1-3 patterns, okay? So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that helped and maybe got you thinking about pentatonic scales even yet a different way, which is what I'm hoping for. And we are definitely going to take this further next week. And again, keep an eye out for the instructional materials that will be available on my website soon. That's going to take all of the things we've been talking about here and have a nice download package with some PDFs where you can actually get the patterns going, okay? Thanks for tuning in, guys. Please like and share the video. I've been so happy with all the comments, positive comments about the lessons, and I hope a lot of you guys are getting a lot of use and a lot of advancement in your playing out of them. All right, we'll see you next time. Take care.